Under the gray morning fog of Oregon's coast, Grace Miller, a single mother with nothing left but faith and a loyal German shepherd, walked into her tiny diner job, unaware that heaven was already watching. Behind a cup of black coffee sat a man who seemed ordinary. Quiet eyes, worn hands, a gentle smile. But beneath that humble disguise was something divine at work. When cruelty struck and the world looked away, he stood, not with anger, but with grace. For sometimes, God doesn't send thunder or angels to change a life. Sometimes, he sends a stranger in flannel, a dog at the door, and a reminder that kindness is the loudest miracle of all. Before we begin, take a second to subscribe, leave a like, and share this story, because every act of compassion brings heaven a little closer to earth. The morning fog rolled in from the Oregon coast like a slow-moving tide, blanketing the small harbor town in a silver hush. Inside the Harbor Light Diner, the air smelled of sea salt and freshly brewed coffee. The neon sign outside flickered weakly against the mist, casting soft blue light on the damp wooden boards. Grace Miller tied her faded blue apron around her waist, fingers trembling slightly from the cold. She was 32, slender but strong, from years of constant work. Her chestnut brown hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her tired but gentle face. The early light touched the faint shadows beneath her gray-green eyes that once held dreams, now dimmed by exhaustion and quiet endurance. She adjusted her apron and whispered to herself, "One day at a time, Grace. Just one day." She moved through the diner with practiced rhythm, refilling sugar jars, checking the pie display, setting down napkins. Outside, through the fogged glass door, Buddy, her 4-year-old German shepherd, sat waiting patiently. His fur, black saddle with golden brown legs, was damp from the morning mist. His eyes followed her every movement, head tilted slightly, as if to reassure himself that she was safe. Buddy had been rescued from an animal shelter 2 years ago, the day after Grace's husband left. Since then, he had become her shadow, protector, companion, and silent witness to every long, weary night. The bell over the door jingled. "Morning, Grace," muttered old Sam, the head cook, as he shuffled out from the kitchen. A stocky man in his 60s, his hair and beard were salt and pepper gray, his eyes soft and weary, but kind. He'd once been a Navy cook, and now spent his retirement flipping pancakes and giving unsolicited life advice. "Fog's thick enough to drown a gull out there," he said, cracking eggs into a pan. Grace smiled faintly. "Then it's a good day to stay inside," she replied, though her tone carried the weight of someone who couldn't afford to stay anywhere but here. The door opened again, this time revealing Frank Doyle, a middle-aged man with a heavy build and a red windbreaker. He owned a local boat repair shop and was known around town for his short temper and crude humor. His face was sunburned and pockmarked, his eyes cold and mean. "Coffee," he barked, slamming his cap onto the counter. Grace nodded politely, pouring his usual without a word. She had learned that silence was safer. Frank watched her as she worked, his lips curling. You know, Grace, maybe if you weren't so clumsy, people would actually tip you. The words stung, but she swallowed her reply. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured the steaming coffee. Suddenly, Frank jerked his elbow intentionally. The mug tipped. Hot coffee splashed across her wrist. Grace gasped quietly, the burn sharp, but her pride sharper. Frank chuckled. Guess I was right. The diner went still, an elderly couple at the corner booth looked away. A young truck driver shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The air thickened with shame, hers and theirs. Grace's heart pounded, not from pain, but humiliation. She wanted to scream, to say she wasn't weak, that she worked 3 jobs just to keep her son fed. But all she managed was a trembling whisper. "Let me clean that up for you, sir." From the far booth near the window, Ethan Reed lifted his gaze from a notebook. He appeared to be in his late 30s, tall and quietly confident, with short, dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His hands were rough, hands that had known work despite the clean shirt he wore. His blue eyes held the calm intelligence of someone used to leading others, yet there was warmth in them too. Something human beneath the practiced composure. Unknown to everyone, Ethan was the CEO of Reed Holdings, a billion-dollar company investing in small businesses. But he was here under no title, just a man trying to understand what humanity looked like away from boardrooms and balance sheets. He had been visiting the diner for 3 weeks, always ordering black coffee and a slice of pie. He'd watched Grace every morning, the way she smiled to customers who barely saw her, the way she brushed her hair behind her ear when nervous, the way her eyes softened each time Buddy barked outside. She reminded him of his own mother, who had worked 3 jobs to raise him after his father died in a shipyard accident. Watching Grace was like watching the echo of her struggle. Now, seeing the burn mark blooming red on her wrist, Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to intervene but held back, knowing timing mattered. He watched the tiny flinch in Grace's shoulders as she wiped the counter, pretending everything was fine. She poured Frank another cup, hands shaking slightly. Frank smirked, muttering something cruel under his breath. When the rush finally slowed, Ethan left a $20 bill beneath his half-eaten pie and stepped outside. The fog brushed his face as he looked down at Buddy, who met his eyes with silent trust. "You're a good judge of character, aren't you, pal?" he murmured, kneeling briefly to pat the dog's head before walking toward the pier. Hours later, after the last customer had gone and the sky turned the color of steel, Grace walked home along the narrow boardwalk. The wind carried salt and loneliness. Buddy trotted beside her, his tail brushing her hand. When she opened the door of her small apartment, her son Lucas Miller, 9 years old, ran to her with excitement. His sandy hair stuck out in every direction, his cheeks flushed. "Mom, guess what? They said I can join the school science fair, but..." His voice softened. "They need the fee tomorrow." Grace forced a smile, crouching to hug him tightly. "We'll find a way, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady even as her chest ached. That night, as the fog rolled back in from the sea, Grace sat by the window, Buddy resting his head on her lap. She looked at her burned wrist and whispered, "Maybe someday." It'll all be worth it. Outside, the diner's neon sign flickered faintly in the mist, an omen of change quietly approaching. The wind howled against the glass windows of Harbor Light Diner, pushing sheets of rain sideways under the flickering streetlights. It was almost closing time, and Grace Miller's uniform clung damply to her arms after a long, grueling shift. The dinner crowd had been rougher than usual, fishermen soaked in salt water and anger, truckers in a hurry to get home before the coastal roads flooded. The last customer, a red-faced man named Cal Murphy, stood at the counter, tapping his fingers impatiently. Cal was in his 40s, with a weather-beaten face, thinning blonde hair, and eyes always half-narrowed in irritation. He'd once worked at the docks until an injury left him bitter and unemployed. Now, he carried that bitterness like a weapon. "Where's my sandwich, sweetheart?" he barked, his words slurred by whiskey. Grace turned from the kitchen window, her voice calm despite the exhaustion in her bones. "Just a minute, sir. It's almost ready." Behind her, old Sam flipped the last patty onto the grill, steam hissing as oil met heat. "Patience, Cal," Sam muttered, his voice gravelly but steady. Cal slammed his palm on the counter, making Grace flinch. "Patience? I've been waiting 20 damn minutes." His tone was sharp, loud enough to silence the rain's rhythm for a moment. Grace's heart pounded, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. "I'm sorry, sir. We're short-staffed tonight." At that moment, a low growl echoed from outside the door. Buddy, drenched from the storm, had sensed the tension. His thick fur was slick with rain, his golden eyes glinting through the glass. When Cal's voice rose again, Buddy barked sharply, tail stiff, ears pinned back. The sound startled everyone in the diner. Grace turned toward the door, grateful for that brief distraction. "Buddy, hush," she said softly, but her voice carried a tremor that made old Sam's brow furrow. Cal scowled. "You can't even keep your mutt quiet?" He shoved the stool back roughly, standing up. Grace stepped back, clutching the counter edge. Sam moved quickly between them, his broad shoulders blocking Cal's advance. "That's enough," Sam said firmly, his blue-gray eyes locking on Cal's. The room went silent again, except for the rain and Buddy's low, warning growl. Cal grumbled under his breath, threw a crumpled $5 bill on the counter, and staggered toward the door. As he pushed it open, Buddy's bark exploded once more, deep and commanding. Cal froze, muttered something about crazy dogs, and disappeared into the storm. Grace leaned against the counter, trembling with relief. Sam shook his head. "One of these days, Grace, that patience of yours is gonna break you." She forced a weak smile. "If it does, who's gonna pay the bills, Sam?" Her tone tried to sound light, but her voice wavered. Sam sighed deeply, wiping his hands on his apron. "You're working yourself into the ground, girl. You got a good heart, but that boy of yours needs a mother who ain't burning herself out." Grace's lips pressed together. She knew he was right, but quitting wasn't an option. "I don't need pity," she said quietly. "Just enough hours to keep the lights on." Sam nodded sadly. "That's what I was afraid you'd say." The bell over the door jingled softly. Grace looked up to see Ethan Reed step inside, rain dripping from his flannel jacket. He looked like any tired laborer after a long day. but there was always something deliberate about him. The way he carried himself, the calm steadiness in his gaze. "Rough night?" he asked gently, his voice low enough to cut through the storm's hum. Grace exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her. "You could say that." Ethan glanced at Buddy, who had now trotted inside and was lying near Grace's feet, still alert. "He's a good dog," Ethan said, crouching slightly to scratch behind Buddy's ear. "Protective." Grace's expression softened as she watched Buddy lean into Ethan's hand. "He's the only man I can count on these days," she said, half-jokingly, though her eyes betrayed a deep ache. Ethan smiled faintly, but behind that smile was thoughtfulness. He had seen this too many times before. People who gave everything and received almost nothing in return. He ordered his usual black coffee and sat near the window, writing something quickly in his notebook. Through the reflection, Grace saw him glance at her more than once. Not in pity, but in quiet study. When his cup was half empty, he looked up and said, "Some storms don't pass, Grace, but sometimes they show us who's really standing with us." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, her eyes misty. Later that night, after Ethan left, Grace locked the diner doors. The rain had eased into a fine drizzle. She knelt beside Buddy, running her fingers through his wet fur. "Good boy," she whispered. "You always know when to protect me." Buddy rested his head on her knee, his eyes soft and loyal. In that small, silent moment, Grace realized that no matter how harsh the world became, she was never truly alone. Not while Buddy's heartbeat echoed beside hers. The rain had returned, light but steady, blurring the harbor's outline into gray watercolor. Inside Harbor Light Diner, the smell of frying bacon mingled with the scent of wet coats and damp sea air. Grace Miller moved briskly between tables, her faded uniform clinging to her back. Her wrist still bore a faint red mark from the burn days earlier, but she ignored it. Each movement was efficient, practiced, the rhythm of survival. Outside, Buddy lay beneath the diner's awning, fur speckled with rain, his amber eyes tracking her through the window with quiet loyalty. Frank Doyle entered again that afternoon, his red windbreaker glistening with raindrops. His face looked more flushed than usual, his breath sharp with the smell of cheap whiskey. Grace felt her stomach tighten the moment she heard his heavy boots scrape across the tile. "Coffee, black," he muttered without looking at her. Grace nodded, keeping her tone even. "Right away, sir." At a booth near the window sat Ethan Reed, his notepad open, a half-drunk cup of coffee beside it. He had begun to blend in, another regular in flannel and worn jeans. But today, his expression was different, more guarded, as if he sensed something was about to unfold. His calm blue eyes followed Frank's every movement. The diner was nearly full, a pair of local fishermen eating chowder, a young mother feeding her toddler mashed potatoes, and Martha Jennings, a school librarian with streaks of silver in her brown hair, reading quietly near the counter. The sound of rain on the roof created a soft rhythm, until Frank broke it. He picked up his fork, stabbed at the steak before him, and sneered. "Overcooked, as usual." Grace approached to apologize, but before she could speak, Frank tipped the plate forward, letting the gravy and meat slide onto the floor with a splatter. "You call that service? You're lucky this dump still hires people like you." The room froze. A single fork clinked against a plate. Grace's chest tightened, humiliation flooding through her veins like heat. She bent down to clean the mess, her hands trembling. That's when a low growl rolled from the doorway. Buddy stood there now, tail stiff, hackles raised, eyes locked on Frank. His wet fur glistened in the diner light. The growl deepened when Frank made a dismissive motion toward Grace. "Control your damn dog," he snapped. Ethan rose from his booth with deliberate calm. The movement was quiet, but powerful enough to silence even the rain outside. He walked forward slowly, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. When he stopped beside Grace, his voice was firm, steady, yet filled with quiet authority. "That's enough," he said. Frank's head jerked up. "Excuse me?" Ethan looked directly at him. "No one is beneath you because they serve you. Respect isn't optional. It's the minimum price for being human." His words were not loud, but they struck harder than a shout. The room fell, completely silent. Grace stood frozen, half-crouched, eyes wide in disbelief. The fisherman looked away, ashamed. Martha closed her book softly, her gaze filled with gratitude. Frank rose from his seat, face red and jaw clenched. "Who the hell do you think you are, talking to me like that?" Ethan met his glare evenly. "Just someone tired of watching bullies mistake cruelty for strength." Then he reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and laid it on Frank's table. "Your meals are paid for the next month," he said evenly. "But if you can't treat people here with respect, eat somewhere else." Frank's breath came in quick bursts, his pride wounded in front of everyone. After a tense pause, he grabbed his jacket, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out into the rain. The door slammed behind him, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Grace's throat felt tight. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "You okay?" She nodded shakily, eyes glistening. I don't even know what to say." He smiled faintly. "You don't need to. Sometimes justice just needs someone to start it." Buddy approached and nudged Grace's hand, as if to reassure her. She crouched down, fingers brushing his fur, her heart still racing. For the first time in months, she felt something unfamiliar. Safety. Outside, the storm began to ease, the rain thinning into mist. Through the window, Ethan watched the horizon fade into pale gray and thought quietly to himself, maybe, just maybe, this place was exactly where he needed to be. The next morning dawned with pale sunlight cutting through the fog like soft gold threads over the Oregon coast. For the first time in months, Harbor Light Diner felt lighter, like the walls had exhaled after holding their breath too long. Grace Miller stood behind the counter, wiping down the same spot on the counter, though it was already spotless. Her hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from something unfamiliar. Hope mixed with disbelief. She kept glancing toward the door, half expecting Ethan Reed to walk in again. And he did. Ethan stepped inside, dressed in his usual flannel shirt and worn jeans. But today, his expression carried a quiet gravity. His dark hair was still damp from the mist outside, and a faint shadow of stubble lined his jaw. He greeted old Sam, who was flipping pancakes with his usual unbothered calm, and then turned to Grace. "We need to talk," he said softly. Grace's stomach tightened. Those words always meant change, and change had rarely been kind to her. They sat in the corner booth where Ethan always wrote his notes. Buddy lay beneath the table, tail curled around his paws, eyes flicking between them protectively. Grace waited, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. Ethan looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Grace, I owe you honesty," he began. "I'm not who you think I am." Grace's lips parted slightly. "You're not?" He shook his head. "My name is Ethan Reed. I'm the CEO of Reed Holdings. I came here, not just as a customer. I was looking for something real, something that reminded me what business should be about." The words hung in the air like a confession. Grace blinked, struggling to process them. "You're what? A CEO?" she whispered. "You mean like a billionaire?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Not quite that dramatic. But yes, I run a company that invests in small businesses, restaurants, shelters, community centers, places that matter." Grace leaned back, stunned. Her first thought wasn't awe, it was fear. She'd seen too many takeovers before. A big company buys out the little ones, promises change, and leaves everyone jobless by Christmas. "If you're here to close us down, at least tell me to my face," she said, her voice cracking. Ethan's eyes softened. "No, Grace. I'm here to build something better. I've watched you, Sam. Everyone here. The way you treat people. The way you care for this place. It deserves to grow, not vanish." He took a deep breath, his tone sincere. "I want to buy Harbor Light Diner, but not to own it. To transform it. I want to create a model business. Fair wages, profit sharing, college aid for workers' kids, and an animal rescue fund." He smiled at Buddy, who wagged his tail as if understanding his name had just been mentioned in something good. Grace stared at him, words failing her. "Why me?" she asked at last. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Because you understand people, Grace. Not numbers, not profits. People. You don't give up, even when the world tries to make you small. I don't need another executive. I need someone with a heart." His voice deepened slightly. "I want you to run it, with Sam as your partner. You'll manage the diner, the staff, the programs. We'll make this place something the whole town can be proud of." Her throat tightened. "Me? I don't even have a college degree," she whispered. Ethan shook his head gently. "You have more education and dignity than any classroom could teach." She covered her face for a moment, tears slipping through her fingers. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "People like me don't get chances like this." Ethan reached across the table, his hand resting lightly over hers. "Then maybe it's time that changed." The door creaked open, and Lucas Miller, her 9-year-old son, peeked inside, carrying Buddy's leash. His sandy hair stuck up in every direction, and his cheeks were flushed from the cold. "Mom," he called softly. Grace turned toward him, tears still glimmering in her eyes. Ethan smiled at the boy. "You must be Lucas. I've heard you're the real boss of the house." Lucas grinned shyly and hugged his mother's waist. "Mom, is everything okay?" Grace nodded, her voice trembling. "Better than okay, sweetheart. God just sent us something good." Buddy barked once, as if to confirm it. In that moment, surrounded by steam, the smell of coffee, and the hum of quiet morning, Grace realized that for the first time in years, her life wasn't defined by fear, but by faith. Ethan stood, shaking Sam's hand firmly. "Let's make this place shine again," he said. Sam grinned, eyes glinting beneath his gray brows. About time someone saw what this diner really was, a harbor for the lost. Grace smiled through tears as Lucas whispered, "Mom, I told you God listens." And she believed him. 6 months later, the harbor town had changed. Or maybe it was the people who had. The morning mist still rolled across the Oregon shoreline, but now it carried the scent of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and something else intangible: warmth. The old Harbor Light Diner was no more. In its place stood Buddy's Harbor, its new wooden sign carved by a local craftsman, featuring the silhouette of a German shepherd gazing toward the sea. The name made everyone smile. Grace Miller stood at the second-floor balcony, arms crossed over her clean new apron embroidered with her name in navy thread. Her hair, once always tied up in haste, now flowed loosely over her shoulders, kissed by sunlight. The woman who had once lived in fear of losing everything now stood in quiet command of something she helped build. Below her, the diner buzzed with morning energy. Locals filled the booths, fishermen, students, elderly couples, and even tourists who had heard about the diner with the dog. Inside, the kitchen was alive with the clatter of pans and laughter. Old Sam, now part owner, moved with surprising agility for a man his age. He wore a new chef's coat, though he still kept his old Navy cap hung by the stove, as a reminder of where he came from. "Grace!" he called, his voice booming over the sizzling bacon. "We've got a new face helping out today!" Grace descended the stairs, her eyes landing on a young woman in her early 20s. "This is Tanya Brooks," Sam introduced. Tanya had short auburn hair and freckles across her pale skin. Her uniform sleeves were rolled up, revealing faint scars on her forearms, the kind that told stories of hard work, not carelessness. Her gray eyes were shy but determined. "Single mom," Sam whispered quietly. "Needed a break." Grace smiled gently. "You'll get one here," she said, handing Tanya a clean towel. "We help each other around here. That's the rule." Tanya's lips quivered into a grateful smile. At the far end of the room, Buddy trotted proudly through the tables, his fur glossier than ever, a red bandana tied around his neck. Customers greeted him like an old friend. Children reached out to pet him, and Buddy, ever the gentleman, wagged his tail patiently. Near the entrance, a notice board called the Wall of Kindness was filled with notes from townsfolk, offers for free tutoring, extra groceries, or meals paid forward. Next to it, A small corner displayed photos of rescued animals that the diner's new charity fund had helped rehome. Outside, the harbor glistened beneath a clearing sky. Grace stepped out to breathe in the salt air just as Ethan Reed approached, his coat dusted with sea spray. He looked more relaxed than he ever had in the city, less CEO, more neighbor. His once clean-shaven face now carried a faint scruff, and his smile came more easily these days. "You've turned this place into something special," he said, handing her a folder. 3 more towns want to partner with us. Portland, Astoria, and Crescent Bay. They want their own Buddy's Harbor. Grace blinked in amazement. 3 towns? Ethan nodded. People are starting to see that kindness can be a business model, too. Lucas burst out from the back, laughter echoing as Buddy chased him across the deck. "Mom, Buddy's winning again!" he shouted. Grace laughed, the sound free and pure. Ethan watched her quietly, something tender flickering in his expression. "You've done more than rebuild a diner," he said softly. "You've rebuilt a community." Grace turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the morning light. "We did," she corrected. The bell above the door jingled as customers continued to stream in. Tanya served coffee, Sam hummed an old sea shanty, and Buddy barked cheerfully at a fisherman dropping crumbs. As the first rays of sunrise broke across the harbor, turning the water to gold, Grace stood for a moment in stillness, letting the beauty of it all wash over her. For so long, her life had been about survival, but now it was about purpose. Down below, Lucas threw his arms around Buddy's neck, the dog licking his cheek as they both looked out to the horizon. The light spread wider, painting everything in soft amber tones: the diner, the dock, the faces of everyone inside. It wasn't just another morning. It was proof that love, when nurtured, could transform even the smallest harbor into a sanctuary of hope. Sometimes, God doesn't part the sea or send angels from the clouds. Sometimes, He works quietly, through people who dare to be kind when the world forgets how. Grace's story isn't just about a woman finding hope. It's about the everyday miracles that happen when faith meets compassion. A diner reborn, a family restored, a community healed. Maybe you've walked through storms like hers, days when the world felt heavy and no one seemed to notice your struggle. But remember, even the smallest act of love can ripple farther than you'll ever see. When you choose kindness, you become someone's answered prayer. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Someone out there may need this reminder tonight. Leave a comment. Tell us your own miracle, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless you, your family, and every Buddy's Harbor waiting to be built in the corners of this world.